Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. As I've mentioned many times before, I am a seventh grade math teacher. So my videos typically focus on the Indiana State Standards for seventh grade. However, I also teach an advanced seventh grade class, and in the second half of the year, we move on into the eighth grade standards. So some of what I'm going to do in this video, I do teach in regular seventh grade. We do slope, we do graphing, and I get into slope-intercept form a little bit with them. But primarily, this is an eighth grade lesson that I do with my advanced class. So slope-intercept form is by far my favorite way to graph because once you learn how it works, it's absolutely the quickest and easiest way to graph a line. Your equation is y equals mx plus b. You're going to hear that a lot over the years in your math classes. Y and x are really just y and x, but m and b get replaced with numbers. M is your slope. So a fun little story, if you're curious why they use an M instead of like an S for slope. The guy back in the day who came up with this whole concept of slope was French. And slope is about how much your line, how quickly it's climbing or falling. Well, the word in the French language that means to climb starts with an M. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it because I did not take French and I don't want to butcher it, but you can look it up if you're curious. But that's why they use an M. B, there's not quite as fun of a story. A is used for x-intercept and B is used for y-intercept. Y-intercept is used a lot more often, though. It just means the point where your line crosses the y-axis. So the first thing you're going to be asked to do is to write an equation in slope-intercept form when you know the slope and the y-intercept. So if I'm plugging this into y equals mx plus b, I need to start by writing y equals. Then for the m, instead of writing an m, I'm going to put in the slope. So 3, put an x with it. My y-intercept in number 1 is a 5, just a regular positive 5. So I put plus 5. That's it. Number 2, y equals, so the slope is negative 1/2. That means negative 1/2 x. Y-intercept is positive 4, so put a plus 4. Number 3, y equals, slope is 7/2, put an x with it. Y-intercept is a negative 1, so instead of putting a plus sign, I'm just going to put minus 1. And then finally, y equals, slope is negative 1, x, and then I have a minus 8. On this one, negative 1x is the same thing as just saying negative x, so both of those would be valid. Okay, so now we're going to go the other way. We've got the equation. We want to, from that equation, pick out what's the slope and the y-intercept. Y-intercept form has to have y by itself. I'm going to show you later, if y is not by itself, you've got to take care of that first. You cannot pick out these pieces, the slope and the y-intercept, until your equation says a plain old y equals something. So in number 1, my slope is the coefficient of x. On this one, it would be negative 3/4. And then my y-intercept is the other number there. It's a positive 6. Number 2, my slope is the coefficient of x. If you don't see 1, it's because it's a 1. It's not a 0, or the x would be invisible. You wouldn't see it at all. Saying I have an x is the same thing as saying I have 1x. Just like I have a cookie means I have 1 cookie. I have $1. I have $1. So my slope is 1. And my y-intercept on this one, there's a minus sign, so it's a negative 9. Number 3, my slope is the coefficient of x, so negative 4. And my y-intercept is the other number in the problem, so a negative 2. Number 4 looks a little bit different, doesn't it? Because it doesn't say plus or minus something. The slope is still easy to pick out there, if I can get this to right. So my slope is 5/3. But for the y-intercept, it doesn't say plus or minus anything. That means the y-intercept is invisible. What's the only number that would make it be invisible? It's a 0, right? This means it goes through the origin. It crosses right through the origin of your graph. Okay. Next type of problem, same deal, but instead of getting your slope and y-intercept from the equation, we're going to get it from the graph. I always do the y-intercept first just because it's easiest. Y-intercept is the point where it hits the y-axis. So on this first graph, it's at a -3. Now my slope from that point, I want to figure out how much I'm climbing or falling, and then how much I'm running over, rise over run for slope. We've talked about that before. So to get from that point, my y-intercept, to the next point I see, and it's got to be where it goes through corners of grid boxes so that they're whole numbers. I have to go up 2, so my top number's a 2, over 1, bottom number's a 1. So the slope is just a 2. Now to put this into an equation, I take y equals, the slope is 2x, and then I have a -3. That's the equation of my line. Let's do another one. Number 2. Y-intercept is the quickest thing to find. The point where it goes through corners of grid boxes, or where it hits the y-intercept. I'm getting ahead of myself. Then I want to focus on my next point for where it goes through corners of grid boxes. So I'm going to go from here to here. It hit at a +5 on the y-axis. My slope, this time my line is falling from the left to the right, so I know it's going to be a negative slope. To get from one point to the next, I have to go down 1, 2, 3, and then I have to go over 2. My slope is -3/2. So my equation would be y equals -3/2 x, and then a positive or +5. These two are the same. The only thing that's different is I didn't put all those individual points on there. So I mentioned on the page before this, you have to find where they go through corners of grid boxes. You don't want to be dealing with estimating. Is it a half? Is it a third? Whatever. You want to make sure they're whole numbers. Here's my y-intercept at a -1. This one looks like it goes through the corner right here. So, and you can pick any of them. Any point where your line goes through the corners of grid boxes. It doesn't matter which one it is. The slope's always going to be the same between any 2 points on your line. So my slope on this one, to get from this point to this point, I go up 2, over 2. 2 over 2 is really just 1. So y equals 1x minus 1. Or you could just say y equals x minus 1. Same thing. Let's do one more of these. My y-intercept for this one, it goes right through the origin. So my y-intercept is a 0. Find another place where it goes through corners of grid boxes. I'm going to do this one down here. So I have to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, over 1, 2, 3, 4. -4 over 4 is the same thing as a -1 for this graph. So my equation would be y equals -1x. Now, it's really not wrong if you put +0. It just looks a little silly. If it's a 0, then that piece becomes invisible. So I'm just going to leave it as -1x, or y equals -x. It's the same thing. Don't forget to put your y equals. It's part of that equation. Okay. So now I want to graph. I've got my equation. I want to get that equation onto the coordinate plane. You might have already been taught where you can make an input-output table. I could plug in numbers like 0, 1, 2, 3, whatever, see what I get for y, and then plot those points and draw my line. And that's fine. That'll always work. It's just the older you get and the more you learn about graphing, that method's way slower than some of your other options. So I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is my favorite way to graph because it's so quick. You want to make sure that your equation is solved for y. That means it's got to have y by itself equals blah, blah, blah. As long as that's the case, then you want to go ahead and pick out your slope and y-intercept. So on this one, my slope, the coefficient of x, is 2/5. The y-intercept, the other number there, is a +1. So to graph this, you put your starting point on your y-intercept. So I'm going to put a point at +1 on my y-axis. From there, a positive slope tells you to move up and then right. Oh boy, Come on. Oh, now it thinks I want to add a note. Okay. For goodness sakes, why does it always do this? You know what? When I make my Jamboards and everything before recording, I never have this problem. It's only when I'm recording so that it can make me look foolish, of course. Anyway, when it's positive, the top number tells you up, the bottom number tells you over. If it's a negative slope, then it tells you down and right. I don't ever go left because it's too easy to get confused. Just remember up and right or down and right. So from that point we just made, we're going to travel up 2 and then right 1, 2, 3. Well, I hit pause because I'm at school and I thought we were about to have an announcement on the PA and then nothing happened. So I put my initial point at +1. From there, I'm going to go up 2 and over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, put a new point. If my graph was bigger and I wanted to keep stair stepping up 2 over 5, you can. Once you get your second point as straight as you can, which is easier said than done on this tablet, I want to go through the points, past the points, arrows on both ends because lines go on forever. Let's look at number 2. My slope is the coefficient of x. I don't see a number there. That means there's a 1. And I always want my slope to be a fraction, so I'm going to put 1 over 1. My y-intercept, in this case, is a -4. Y-intercept becomes your starting point. So I'm going to go down to a -4 on the y-axis and put my starter point. From there, my slope is positive. So this one again is telling me up and right. So from that point I just made, I'm going to go up 1 over 1. If you want to keep doing that, you can. You really only need to get a second point. That way you know where to draw your line through. Through them, past them, arrows on the ends. Let's do a couple more of those. Number 3, my slope on this one would be 2/3 because that's the coefficient of x. My y-intercept, it says -6, so -6. I'm going to go down 6 and put a point on the y-axis. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right there on the bottom. My slope is a +2/3, so that's telling me up and right. So from that point I just made, I'm going to go up 2, right 1, 2, 3. Through them, past them, arrows on the ends. Number 4, my slope is a -3. Now you always want your slope to be a fraction. You need to know how many up or down and then how many over. So I'm going to make that -3 over 1. My y-intercept is a +4. So my starter point is going to go up to 4 on the y-axis. Now when we did positive slope, it was telling us to move up and right. Negative slope tells us to move down and right. So from this point I made right here, I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3, and over 1. If you want to keep doing that, keep stair stepping, you can, but then you need to make sure you draw your line through the points, past the points, arrows on the ends. Whoops, didn't mean to bump that. Sorry. Okay, so that's how to graph. The last thing that I want to show you, I've mentioned a couple times that y-intercept only happens when y is by itself. If y is not by itself, you've got to rearrange it first. Don't try to pick out your slope and y-intercept until it says y equals something. The first equation I have written here is called standard form. You have your x, then your y, then equals your constant. To get it in slope-intercept form, I've got to get the y by itself. I'm going to start by subtracting the 5x. On the left, I still have 3y. Now on the left, I know right and left. On the left, I have 3y. How about on the right? I can't put the 9 and the 5x together. They're not like terms. One of them has an x and the other one doesn't. So that is not the same thing as 4x. It's not wrong if you put the 9 first, but slope-intercept form, it's supposed to be y equals mx plus b. The x part is supposed to go first, right after the equal sign. So I'm going to put my -5x and then my +9. Now to get y by itself, I need to divide everything by 3. Every single part gets divided by 3. So that leaves me with y equals, you can just leave that -5/3 x, and then that would be a +3. From there, your slope is negative 5/3. Your y-intercept is 3. You could graph it or whatever you need to do with it. The second equation I have, and this happens in a different section as well, it's called point slope form. Point slope form doesn't look super user friendly, but we can make it a lot easier by just solving for y. First thing we need to do is take care of the distributive property. We don't want to leave that with parentheses. So I'm going to, in my class, we call this mailman. He's going to deliver the mail to each house inside the neighborhood. So I still have y minus 6 equals, that becomes 4x minus 4. The opposite of subtracting 6 now to get y by itself is adding 6. I only have to do that once on the other side. It's not like when I divided by 3 and I had to divide everything by 3 on this first problem. This one I'm just adding a 6 to each side. So this disappears here and I get y equals 4x, that would be plus 2. So my y-intercept is positive 2. My slope is 4, or 4 over 1. Those two things we'll work on more in another section. I just wanted you to see that any equation can be rewritten in slope-intercept form. Right now, the focus of your homework is just going to be on that y equals mx plus b. This was just kind of an overview into other sections. Okie doke.